Next week at the Intel Developer Forum, Intel's big annual gathering where they, try to set the path of computer or PC technology for the next year or 5. We're going to find out about new technologies and processors that we'll all be drooling over. We hope. That doesn't mean Intel or AMD have been silent in the past few weeks. Joining us today is Lloyd Case, freelance tech writer and analyst, to whet our appetites for processing power, starting with the Core i5. This is a great new processor. I mean, basically,
that's good.
It's Core i7 for everybody in terms of performance.
Well, it is, and actually we should qualify that a bit. There's new Core i7s too. What's really new is that they fit in a new socket. This is what's called socket 1156.
And it's got a sort of yin-yang design going on there that kind of fascinates me.
Right. It's a new socket, which means Intel has more than one socket to worry about now, right? And so do users. But it creates the ability to have lower cost motherboards because it's only 2 channels of memory instead of 3 like on the old Core i7s.
Interesting. So are they gonna basically drop off 1366, or are they gonna keep that socket going?
Not at all. So 1366, which is triple channel memory, is really great for performance enthusiasts, certain kinds of high-end applications like workstation class apps. And that's the socket that Intel is going to use for the next generation 32 nanometer 6-core processor.
So for the new socket, how do they actually save money? Because it doesn't look like, it's got a fewer pins, but
it
I
does
don't
have
think
fewer
that's what
pins, but
they're
there's
thinking.
several other things. For one thing, since they were able to cut down the number of memory channels to 2 instead of 3, they brought the PCI Express controller onto the chip itself. Also, they cut down the PCI Express controller a little bit. It's now 16 lanes total for the graphics, so you can have one 16-lane graphics card or 2 8-lanes, set up with if you're doing SLI or something like that.
Interesting thought. So is that going to actually, I guess it's going to cap overall performance, but there's some other tweaks in between the Core i7 and the Core i5.
Right.
What's the biggest difference?
The difference between any Core i5 and Core i7 is hyperthreading. So hyperthreading is Intel's term for what's called simultaneous multithreading. So in other words, with simultaneous multithreading, you have the core, and then you have a sort of logical processor that runs and uses any extra resources that core has for that task. And with the Intel quad-core processor, that means you have 8 threads on 4 cores.
So if you're a content creator running Photoshop, or you're into video editing, you have a fairly high-end tool, are you going to notice the difference on the Core i5 versus the Core i7?
You definitely will, and for 2 reasons. First of all, the hyperthreading really kicks in with some of the apps like Photoshop, like Premiere, and those kinds of applications. Also, one of the things that happens is that the Intel has chosen to make the Core i5 lower clock speed, so you get a double whammy. You get no hyperthreading and you get a lower clock speed. On the other hand, it's very overclockable, so if you want to just pump it up yourself, you can.
You were saying people are hitting like 4 gigahertz with the Core i5?
4.2 gigahertz is just air, and who knows what they're doing with liquid cooling.
So for content creators, they may want to still go to a Core i7. What about for people who are running a basic video game or simple applications that don't benefit as much from multi-threading?
An overclocked Core i5, or even a Core i5 at the standard clock rate, which is 2.67 gigahertz, is still perfectly good for a lot of games and stuff.
That's a good thing. Any other big announcements? So we've got a new processor, a new socket, sort of a splitting once again of the lines from Intel with a more high-end version of the processor for the consumer. Anything else big going on at Intel right now?
At Intel, well, I mean, the big push at Intel Developer Forum will be 32 nanometers. In fact, they talked a little bit about that a couple weeks ago to the press. They showed a demo of the 32 nanometer Westmere processor. Now, for frame of reference, the current Core i7 and i5s are 45 nanometers. So in other words, Intel is shrinking the process again, so you put more transistors on a chip or make the chip smaller, whatever the choice is, depending on what they want to do.
That's a huge shrink.
Yeah, it's pretty substantial. You're getting very small, fine lines there.
That's kind of a scary thought. And it also will improve the yields per wafer, which in theory should bring the price down.
Right, and it is interesting that Intel has publicly announced their first known shipping product based on Westmere will be a mobile 2-core part.
Interesting. Yeah. In terms of, actually just maybe think one thing I meant to ask about Core i5 versus the Core 2 Duo. Is it significantly faster?
Yes.
Or really?
Yes. The $200 Core i5, is faster in almost all the benchmarks than the $350 Core 2 Quad 9650.
So it's definitely, if you're going to go for a $200 part, that is the part to go with.
If you're willing to upgrade your motherboard and all that kind of stuff, yeah, it's time to move up.
It's always the hard part. Is it running on, which type of memory is it using?
DDR3.
It is using DDR3. So you'll be motherboard, memory, and processor.
Right. Although some people may have had DDR3 on their Core 2 Duos too.
That's not
Core 2 quads.
Not a lot of people, though. AMD did a bunch of announcements. They had big press briefings recently, a bunch of stuff you can't talk about yet. What can you tell us about what's going on with AMD?
Well, one of the things that they're announcing just this week is a $100 quad-core processor. So $99 for their low-end Athlon Athlon X4 processor. And Athlon 2X4, I think. I can't keep track of their naming schemes. At any rate, what is important about it is it's a quad-core processor. It's $99. If you get one of their integrated graphics motherboards based on their 785G chipset, you know, you can build a system for probably under $400, close to $300, you know, if you're willing to skimp on the hard drive and the optical drive.
And probably have fairly serious processor performance.
It'd be pretty decent for, you know, everyday type of use. Yeah, you know, you could populate an office with these for pretty cheap.
Are you seeing AMD primarily? They seem to have lost the battle at this point for overall processor performance.
Yeah, until AMD kind of comes out with their next generation CPU architecture, then that's probably correct. They can't compete on performance, so they're trying to compete on price. And also, they were at one point trying to compete even on lower power, but Intel's taken that away from them even. On the other hand, we can't talk too much about it now, but they got some cool stuff in the graphics pipeline that'll be interesting.
What are you seeing with Eyefinity? That was one of the things you can talk about at this point.
Eyefinity is AMD's new technology for driving multiple monitors. And when I say multiple, I don't mean 2, I mean 3, 4, 5, and up to 6 displays with one graphics card that has one GPU on it. It's actually pretty neat stuff because what's important about it is the software allows you to have multiple configurations. For example, you can have 3 monitors all in portrait mode. So, you know, if you're doing a lot of text editing or that kind of stuff, you have 6 displays. If you have 6 30-inch displays in landscape mode, then you can do per pixel editing on a 12 megapixel photograph.
That's an insane kind of visual to try to work with. Is anybody making a monitor that high resolution? Because a lot of the demos seem to be like 22. They had one case where it was 24 monitors driven off of 4 graphics cards.
No, that's the problem. You see, it costs a lot of money to add more pixels to an LCD, the single LCD. So instead, you put multiple LCDs together. One vendor was showing they're going to be shipping a package. I can't see who the vendor is, but they're shipping a package of 1 to 3 LCDs with a proprietary stand, so they all kind of fit tightly together. It's going to be kind of a neat little array.
I like that thought. DirectX 11, is it safe to say it's around the corner now that Windows 7 is here?
Yep, it's going to be launched officially when Windows 7 launches.
Nice. Should we be delaying to buy a graphics card at this point if somebody's on the edge for a high-end graphics card? I
would say wait till the end of this month anyway.
Okay. You know, what's the biggest thing DirectX 11 is going to bring to consumers?
A bunch of things. They're going to bring some, you know, the usual kinds of visual enhancements. One of the coolest features is something called hardware tessellation, and what that means is that the artist defines the object or the item as a set of patches, and within those set of patches, the GPU itself says, I can add more triangles, and so as you move closer to the object, it gets much more detailed, so you don't have the octagonal heads, you know, that's pretty common among a lot of 3D games and stuff like that.
That's actually really neat, because it's almost like creating a fractal system where it's actually generating the...
Right, it's actually generating the geometry on the fly.
Oh, that's actually really crazy. Yeah. Anything else that stands out from DX11?
Some efficiency stuff that will actually help people even with current generation graphics cards. They're finally multi-threading the entire API. And so that means that drivers and the what's called the distributor, the stuff that drives the games, will be multi-threaded, and that will actually have a benefit on DX10 and DX9 games, as well as DX10 and DX9 cards. So you'll see some performance improvements, even if you're just playing old games with old cards.
So any other thoughts about any other sort of background technologies or anything you expect to see Intel talking about at Developer Forum next week?
A couple of things that we'll be looking for in addition to the 32 nanometer stuff. A lot of sort of platform stuff is starting to ramp up. We're going to see announcements based on the new SATA 6 gigabit per second standard, both hardware as well as, you know, chipsets and stuff.
Will that be used more for RAID or for they actually expect single drives or SSDs?
I asked that question too, and one hard drive vendor told me that with the way the data densities are increasing on the outer platters, even 7200 RPM drives, they're going to start saturating 3 gigabits per second the next year.
Really?
Yes. This is reads, obviously, not writes. And then, so yeah, I think it'll help a little bit. Other thing we'll be seeing more of USB 3.0, which is much faster.
How long is it going to take for USB 3.0 to actually?
New chipsets. I mean, we'll probably see him in a year from now.
So, will you come back in a couple weeks? Tell us what else you saw at IDF?
I'd love to.
And the other thing I want to talk to you about: would you be willing to, because Lloyd is the premier system builder, at least out of people I know. You want to come back and help us do some like $500 ultimate gaming machines, some targeted machine builds?
That's a great idea. I'd love to do that.
Cool. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Lloyd Case. You can find more of his work at improbableinsights.com. The man is brilliant and his writing is fun. Go to the website and check it out.